So let's start by generating our motivation for being here this evening. And some years ago, when we studied Nagarjuna's Precious Garland of Advice to a King, that was the first time I heard teachings on the paths and grounds that the bodhisattvas travel to attain full awakening. And that was the first time I heard that it is only on the 8th bodhisattva ground that you are completely free from afflictions, their seeds, and polluted karma. And from the time of entering the bodhisattva path, which happens when you have spontaneous bodhicitta, it takes 2 countless great eons to get to the 8th ground. And so I realized in this kind of naive way, wow, I'm going to be working on the afflictions for a very long time. Because the last I checked, I'm a completely ordinary sentient being that hasn't entered any kind of path. I don't have spontaneous bodhicitta, nor the wisdom directly realizing emptiness, not even the mind that day and night unceasingly aspires for liberation. And just recognizing this was not discouraging. In fact, I think it helps my mind to be more realistic about where I am on the path and to be vigilant. When arrogance arises thinking, oh, I know this affliction, I have it under control. It's like, well, check up, You think you're anywhere close to the 8th ground? I really don't think so. So, that prevents us from getting blindsided as well. And thinking in this way also helps me to have more compassion for myself, knowing that for sure the afflictions are going to arise out of habit. I'm going to get overwhelmed. And so it serves me well to study and learn the antidotes and to become very familiar with them. And to know that all other beings around me are in the same boat. From the cats who can't help but chase after chipmunks, to those of us who are habituated to attachment, anger, and it arises once we are triggered, and we just follow that old habit. So today, let's cultivate a spirit of open-heartedness and transparency as we review how to work with the afflictions. We don't have to be perfect. We don't have to pretend that we don't have faults, because we know we're in the same boat. What we do have to do is to keep practicing the Dharma, because that's what's going to truly help us to get out of this situation. And by working with our own afflictions and overcoming them, we create the causes to someday be able to help others to do the same, to teach them, to guide them, so that they too may remove the afflictions from their mind streams and become fully awakened as well. So, very good evening to everyone. Venerable Chögyön is still on the road in Sydney, so we're continuing our review of the book that she's written together with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Approaching the Buddhist Path, the first volume of the Library of Wisdom and Compassion. And we are right in the middle of a review of Chapter 3, which is on the mind and emotions. And right now we're on a section called Working with Afflictions. So everybody sitting in this room has studied and practiced the Dharma for some time. I'm guessing that all of you have some experience and observation of the afflictions and have attempted to work with them to varying degrees of success, I'm guessing. So I'd like today's session to be really discussion-based. It's going to be very interactive and practical. Because it's kind of like this is the stuff we know and then you just kind of forget it when you're in the heat of the moment. So let's help each other to review and remember what to do when we're triggered or overwhelmed. I'll do a quick recap of where we are in the book, and more importantly, to revisit the definition of afflictions, because, just to make sure we're on the same page and we're discussing the same thing. So I think already people have reviewed this definition before, but I think there's a very nice write-up on page 45 of the book if you're looking at the hard copy. And I'm just going to read it out. So His Holiness says, the Sanskrit word klesha is a commonly used word in Buddhist texts that refers to mental factors that afflict the mind and do not allow it to abide peacefully. So that's the key characteristic of an affliction. It's a mental state that's causing disturbance in the mind. Whatever tranquility is, it is gone. So these disturbing emotions and views enslave the mind, confining it to a narrow perspective, and motivate actions that hinder the happiness of both ourselves and others. So that's the second key characteristic, that the afflictions get in the way of our happiness and also sometimes cause us to hinder the happiness of others. And as such, kleshas are obscurations on the path to liberation, and Buddhist texts speak of their disadvantages and the antidotes to them. And as Venerable Seppel reminded us last week, there is no English equivalent to the word klesha that encompasses mental factors as diverse as emotions, attitudes, philosophical views, and innate, unquestioned assumptions about ourselves and the world. So for the sake of simplicity in this whole series of books, Venerable Children and His Holiness have translated klesha as afflictions, and sometimes expand it and say disturbing emotions and wrong views. So some afflictions, such as the view of a personal identity, are called views in English, while others, for example, anger and jealousy, are called emotions. And mental states, such as not believing that awakening is possible, are called views. Right? So here we're just, so when we say afflictions, that's shorthand for this whole range of everything from conceptions that are totally distorted, that might harm ourselves and others, to what we will call emotions, especially in our modern psychological understanding, like anger, jealousy, and so on. And then in this chapter, after setting up this definition, His Holiness goes on to look at constructive and destructive emotions. And I think for those of you who were here yesterday, Venerable Sangye Kadro kind of touched on this, that he's taking kind of a non-traditional view of the disturbing emotions these days. And he does that in this section where he looks at attachment, fear, anger, and disillusionment from both perspectives. How might attachment, fear, and anger and disillusionment have a constructive effect? I mean, the traditional Buddhist presentation would not cover that, right? But just saying, hey, from a modern psychological perspective, are there times where these emotions could help us in our spiritual practice? And then, of course, he looks at them from the destructive aspect as well. So that section has been reviewed, I think, months ago by Venerable Lamsel. Yeah. And then last week, Venerable Seppel went on to look at emotions and survival. And there, His Holiness puts forward this theory that disturbing emotions are based on exaggeration and projection. And as a result, they are detrimental for our survival as individuals and also as a species. Yeah, so it's not that anger helps us to survive, but he's putting forward the idea that, if you have anger, you're exaggerating what's going on, and you may freeze or you may overreact, and that may actually jeopardize your safety. Yeah. So it's a theory that he's putting forward for us to check out. And the theory is that if we cultivate constructive emotions, then we have long-term happiness. Yeah. So that's the logic that's running through this chapter, right? That's why we come to this section on working with afflictions. Because if afflictions are not helpful for our individual survival or even our survival as a species, then we want to find a way to remove them. Yeah. So this whole chapter is about why the afflictions can be removed and how to do that. So as part of a review, I thought we'd begin with some discussion. So I'd like you to settle back into a meditation position, and I'll pose 2 questions for you to think about before we do a bit of pair work. So just take a moment to come back to your breath. And go back to the time when you had not yet met the Dharma. What was your perception and understanding of what we now call the afflictions? If you like, you can focus on a specific affliction when you do this reflection. And now that you've studied the Dharma and practiced it for a while, how has your perception and understanding of the afflictions changed? So for those of us who are in this room, we'll take a bit of time to pair up and just share from both sides 3 or 4 minutes before we come back as a circle. And if you're online or watching the teachings alone at home, you can spend this time journaling about these 2 questions. So I'll repeat them. Before you met the Dharma, what was your perception and understanding of what we call the afflictions? And if you like, you can focus on just one affliction. And now that you've met the Dharma or studied and practiced for some time, how has your perception and understanding changed? I know we are in odd numbers, so there'll be one group of 3. So let's just spend about 10 minutes doing this. Okay, so we have microphones in the room, and we'll pass them around. So what came up for people?
I think the thing that was most obvious for me is that before I met the Dharma, I thought that pride was the antidote to low self-esteem.
Mm-hmm.
Now that I met the Dharma, it's not so misconstrued. I can see that self-esteem definitely comes from other places, and pride really just is it's like the backdrop to a really bad play or something like that.
Okay, so like wrong ideas about how to work with negative states of mind, right? Just not knowing how they come about. So you think, okay, let's kind of push to the opposite, inflating myself. But why doesn't it make the low self-esteem go away? Yeah, for sure. That's definitely one misunderstanding. Other thoughts that came up?
Before I met the Dharma, I thought that indulging in my lust was the source of all pleasure, and not just the physical action of sex or something, but the whole process was pleasurable. And also it was totally natural, normal. As long as I'm doing it in socially acceptable ways, then it's fine. There's no problem.
And then, did anything change?
Yeah. So after I met the Dharma, I'm seeing more subtly how harmful it is during the whole process, how unsatisfactory the whole thing is, and results in a lot of pain and suffering mentally. For yourself and for the other person. And Tanya and I were just talking about the whole society is structured, in a way that promotes this. But just seeing how it's just a source of misery. Yeah.
Did that come up in other pairs? Just how normal the afflictions seem, or how we live in a world that seems to encourage them? Yeah. It's funny, I was telling someone the other day when I decided to move to a monastery, this friend I hadn't heard from for a long time suddenly called me up and was like, we have to go to lunch. I said, okay. So I go to lunch and she's like, I can't believe you're going to walk away from competition in your life. She said, she was like deeply concerned for me as a human being. No? She's like, how are you going to survive? It's like, without competition, how will you grow? I'm like, I think I'll be fine. It's kind of funny because she had just lost her job during the Asian financial crisis after Bear Stearns collapse, So here's this person telling me I should compete to survive. So that was just curious, but I was touched by her sincerity. But yeah, we think without attachment or competition, we're going to die or lose out in some way. Yeah.
So in many instances, people confuse strength with anger. So the angrier you get, the stronger people think you are, or you try to project strength by getting really, really angry, and becomes normal if you are not getting angry at things, and you're giving others the impression that you're weak, or people associate that with being weak, and we can walk all over that person because they just are not exhibiting any anger, or and the louder you get, the more you think you're going to get your way. So.
Yeah, just the whole topsy-turvy view we have of the world before we've met the Dharma. But that reminds me too of how we associate people with their behavior, right? Like, okay, this loud, angry person is therefore powerful in some way. Did that come up for other people? Like whether you associate the afflictions with a person or yourself? I mean, before you met the Dharma, did you think they were just union oneness?
I was thinking about how growing up in a family where there was a lot of anger and chaos, that was the norm, and so I emulated that. But then, even before I met the Dharma, there was, I think I would say, a yearning for some meaning and some peace and whatever. And so it's kind of like bouncing off of that and somehow knowing that there was something different that one could do. But I didn't know what it was. And where I did look, it didn't bring any relief or answers, It took a while to find the Dharma to then see where the answers lay for me.
And for me, I had a very, very different experience of anger, is that the anger was usually followed by some form of violence. So instead of modeling it, I went to the other side of the universe and became so terrified of particularly my own anger, thinking that if I dare to get angry, I'm going to destroy somebody, I'm going to harm somebody, I'm going to abuse somebody. And so to be able to grow out of that, to see that anger is not the person, and that the violent response is a separate deal than the affliction itself. And even though it didn't make me say, oh, now I can be an angry person because I don't get violent, it helped me not to be afraid when people got angry with me. And then I got to be less afraid about my own anger. And then I could deal with it slowly.
Wow, so I mean, it's like there's so many layers, right? So there's this thing we call an affliction or a disturbing emotion, and then there's what society says about it, whether it's encouraged or not, like, okay, this is powerful, this is harmful. And then there's the stuff our family says about it, right? Anger is okay, or anger is bad. And then there's stuff that we then tell ourselves about the afflictions, right? Like same, I was definitely, for a long time I was like, I'm not an angry person. I don't have anger. And I was terrified when I finally looked inward and was like, I'm so angry. Because I thought, I'm bad. I'm so bad for being angry. I'm so shameful. There was one whole retreat where I think, this is so embarrassing, but that was definitely one of those winter retreats where you're like, I have so much anger. I have a serious problem. I was in the library reading 3 books about anger at the same time. I think like, where's the answer? And I cried for 1 hour at some point in there. I was reading Thich Nhat Hanh's anger book, Working with Anger, and then the Compassion book with Dr. Russell Gold's and Venerable Children. So yeah, don't go there. There are better ways to deal with anger earlier. But yeah, just getting in touch with that fear of the affliction. Yeah.
I'm really glad that you bringing up this thing of thinking there's unity between our afflictions and ourselves, and so that how can I separate myself from this, and then the relief of knowing that these are all adventitious and they can go away and they're not deep-rooted. They're just habits of mind. They're really habits of mind, and there are antidotes, and they diminish based on your diligence in recognizing and applying the antidotes. It's kind of like almost mechanical. It's like if I if I have enough introspective awareness to recognize which affliction it is, and I know what the antidote is, and I apply it, then it goes away, and it diminishes in my life going on the long term. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah, Venerable Jampa. I want to add people online too, if they have thoughts, can type them in, and we're happy to hear from you.
I was also discussing that the habit of running away from the afflictions was very big and modeled to me too, in form of, distracting yourself or indeed really running away. And even when you come here to the Abbey and you're starting to work and look and people reflect towards you, also this urge of no, like you kind of also indicated, so terrible and you want to run away. And we had this topic many times during EMR. And then I also remember that I practiced in the very beginning of my Buddhist approach a meditation form where this has been more subdued. You calm your mind so strongly that you're kind of in a peaceful state, and to anger you don't feel so much. But then something was missing because there was still the anger and there was no tool. The meditation alone, calming the mind, wasn't helpful. So then I was thinking about the Buddha's approach, that the middle way. He was also approaching asceticism. How you say? Yeah. But that wasn't the solution, just refraining from food or refraining from, I don't know what it is, or running away from an angry person, or, constantly. And but to find the middle way what we do in our tradition, to identify the afflictions and to learn the antidotes and to practice them slowly, step by step.
I think while we're on the point of running away from afflictions, this is something I also did a lot. And when I was younger, I would run away from the situation itself, because I thought somewhere in the situation was the affliction, and that's the reason I was angry. So I would relocate myself, and that's even what my parents taught me to do. Like, when you're upset, you leave the room and go do something else. But then as I got to high school and into college, it was like, well, if I can't run away from the situation physically, why don't I just get intoxicated in some way, and you leave the situation mentally. It's like it's the same behavior of trying to leave the situation in order to solve the antidote. Sorry, as an antidote, but leaving the situation is kind of impossible because you're carrying these afflictions with you.
Right, you're like the dog with the fleas. You move to a different courtyard and you're still itchy.
So Tracy shares that before I thought afflictions just arose out of nowhere, or that they were a product of particular life experiences, not something I could control. I didn't see them as harmful, more as indicators that something was right or wrong in my world. Now I see that afflictions are harmful to myself and others. They come from my own untamed mind, not from anything external. They need to be tamed so that I can see clearly and act with wisdom. And then a friend from Singapore shares that before I met the Dharma, I thought that it was the one sure way to all my problems. In other words, I didn't need to put in any effort. Now I see that practicing the Dharma means a lot of hard work and self-control and lower our expectations. Someone else shares that after they met the Dharma, I learned the afflictions were a product of an inherently existent self. And because that self is relative, then afflictions loosened up in some way. And then someone else shares that before meeting the Dharma, I admired anger and sarcasm very much and tried to emulate it. I was very relieved when I found out that after meeting the Dharma that I was not an angry person, that I was simply a person who got angry sometimes.
Yeah, and what Venerable Jampa was sharing too reminded me of, there's this beautiful video that's part of the Discovering Buddhism series, where Lama Yeshe talks about what meditation is all about. Has anyone seen that? Right, where he takes a glass of water, I think, and he says, this is what your mind is usually like, and he shakes the glass, and it's like, ah. And he said, when you meditate, and you put the glass down, That's what you're doing with your mind. Yeah, it just settles. And then after it settles, then you get to see that there's all kinds of gunk in the water, right? But then you learn methods to get it out. We don't stay stuck at, and I'm guessing I'm not the only one who has, right? Where the mind settles and you're like, oh, it's so dirty. Oh, worst, pour it away, cannot pour it out. Wah! Right, and then you get stuck and like, this is a bad cup, this is such a ugly water, worst, don't want to look at it. And then finally you read the teachings and it's like, you can purify the water. It's like, oh, really? And then you try and it's like, oh, it's getting a bit clearer. Yeah, and then slowly you find that the dirt is not in the nature of the water. I think it's very important not to get stuck at that point where I think often when we go into retreat or we start our practice, the mind gets quiet and you're like, oh, I'm a bad person, or I'm so distracted. Like I'm sure all of us who facilitate SAFE, a lot of the newer students write in saying, my mind is so noisy, I'm such a distracted, mindless person, I'll never make it. It's like, yeah, you're just seeing the dirt for the first time. And that's actually something to rejoice in because now you can get it out. Since we know the methods. Yeah. So I wanted to do this little discussion because in this section on working with the afflictions, His Holiness begins with this little section on the nature of the afflictions. It's basically what Tanya has kindly summarized. I was like, did she read this book or write it? Or in a very compact way, where first of all, he lays out what the afflictions are, what is their nature, and why they can be removed. Yeah, because we have to believe that before we'll even start. If we're stuck at that place of like, I am an angry, hopeless person, then why bother? Yeah. Or if you believe, oh, it's genetically predetermined and I'm never going to change, my whole family's like this, and I will henceforth forever be like this, my children will be like this, then you're never going to try, right? So all of us had talked about how all these wrong views are actually acquired very often by wrong ideas in society, things that we're taught. So, we can unlearn this or we can try out other theories. Yeah. So I put on the board here what's basically a summary of that first section of this section in the chapter, right? Which basically you can phrase in terms of 4 syllogisms. Yeah, for folks who have been studying syllogisms on Thursdays, yeah, where His Holiness basically says, afflictions can be eliminated. Yeah, why? Because they are not an intrinsic part of the mind. Yeah, they haven't penetrated its clear and cognizant nature. Right. So, first of all, we have to prove to ourselves, or we have to believe, afflictions are not an intrinsic part of the mind. Right. That takes a while, doesn't it? Yeah. We see the anger and we're like, oh, it's never going away. I'm perpetually angry. But like that person online said, you pause and you realize there are moments in the day when you're not angry. So you can't possibly be 24/7 an eternally angry person. Yeah, so you got to start challenging those views that you're carrying. And then, if the afflictions are not an intrinsic part of the mind, they're not part of its clear and cognizant nature, then it follows that they necessarily can be eliminated. Right, so that's another thing for us to try out, right? You try out the antidotes and you're like, does it work? Does it actually reduce my anger? Seems like it does. So, yeah, they can't be in the nature of the mind. It's something, there are causes that affect it. Wow. Right. And then the next idea he puts forward is that afflictions are fragile and they can't stand up to powerful states of mind that understand reality. Why? Because they are rooted in ignorance and other distorted conceptions. So this is another hard one, I think. Yeah, that afflictions are rooted in ignorance and other distorted conceptions. And do we believe that? I mean, like we were just discussing, often society tells us, no, the afflictions are perfectly natural. They are the logical way to think. Yeah, that's what's going to help you get ahead. If you step on the other guy, who's fighting for the job, I mean, why would you give him the space? Like, forget it, right? Me first. Yeah. And so it takes a while for us to see, hey, like Stephen said, maybe this is not pleasurable. Maybe doing this is harming other people. Maybe it's harming myself. Maybe it's not even based on a realistic view of what brings happiness, right? Like how much pleasure can we get out of one object, right? I mean, once you eat the 10th chocolate chip cookie, you must experience some suffering of change, right? It's like, it really cannot be in that cookie. You can experiment, please go ahead, right? Don't blame me. Right? It's ignorance and distorted conception, right? And then the same thing, right? When we realize, if it's not based on a realistic perspective, then maybe there are some other states of mind that can actually completely remove them. Yeah. So I think that too, like Venerable Kunga was talking about today, that takes some time to get to the faith of conviction around this, right? That, I am capable of other perspectives. There are other ways of thinking that will actually make the affliction completely go away. Yeah. I think that's, I don't know, that was definitely a challenge for me when I first met the Dharma, right? Where Venerable says, with thought transformation, your whole perspective shifts such that the affliction is not even relevant. I'm like, what? Really? Right? Because, I mean, in the early days of thought transformation, it just feels like I'm suppressing it, or I'm like forcing myself to think they are bodhisattva. But still, I'm like, angry, right? But I think as we try out different methods and you try and see things from a bigger perspective, it's like, yeah, maybe the anger actually is not relevant to this situation. Like, wow, people are suffering. They created the cause. They're going to suffer further. Why should I get mad? Yeah. So we'll talk more about that later. These shifts of mind that actually help the afflictions just fall away. And then we come to the antidotes, as some of you were mentioning as well, yeah? Where before we met the Dharma, it was like, are there other options? Are other ways of thinking actually possible? Well, apparently yes. So His Holiness here says, constructive states of mind can be developed limitlessly because their basis is the innate subtle mind of clear light that continues eternally without interruption. This, I have to say, is a tough one for me. I was talking to Venerable Seppel about it because it seems so abstract, right? Like, what is this innate subtle mind of clear light? Yeah, but I think basically if we go back to the end of chapter 2, he's just talking about the nature of the mind to know its objects and engage in it's the emptiness of the mind as well, that it's able to engage objects, it's changing moment by moment. And so if you create the causes, that love will continue to grow. Yeah, it comes to the next point too, where there's nothing that can stop the realistic beneficial states of mind. They're not based on ignorance, they're not based on distorted logic. Right? So the mind can continue to nourish them. As long as we keep creating those causes and conditions, they will extend. Anything you want to add, Venerable Seppel?
They're not necessarily based on ignorance. They can be.
Oh, right, that's true. Yeah. They can still be based on ignorance, yeah. But when we get to the stage where ignorance is completely removed, that love is limitless, right? Because we have a genuine understanding of what we are, what other sentient beings are, and the afflictions are no longer in the way. So still an article of faith, not convictional faith, but aspiring perhaps for me. But number 4 definitely resonates with me, which is that these constructive states of mind can be developed limitlessly because they're based on accurate perception. And no counteracting force exists that can eliminate them forever. Yeah. So, when I think about, what I've learned in the Dharma, if I know that it's a realistic perspective, right, then the state of mind that's based on that cannot be challenged or changed. Destroyed. Yeah. But sometimes I think coming to the accurate perception, it's so like the total opposite of what we've grown up with or what we've been taught. It comes as a shock, right? Something as simple as the nature of the body is impermanent or foul. That's accurate, yeah. But for some reason, profoundly shocking. Those of you who are here, I'll never forget the 4 establishments of mindfulness retreat where I think for 3 months, we never got past the foulness of the body. Every discussion group was people like, really? It's like, come on, you blow your nose. Like, look, you poop. Hey, this is not like some pleasant, amazing, pleasurable, joyful, sweet-smelling thing, right? There was one person in the group who was like, but my wife's hair. And you're like, if you saw the hair in your food, you're like, ew, send it back to the kitchen. Yeah. So Nagarjuna points this out, that these very obvious basic, accurate perceptions are shocking to us because of the distortion that our mind has been habituated to. But once we move the mind in that direction, then we are happier, isn't it? We stop expecting unrealistic things from our own and others' bodies. When it breaks down, it's like, okay, it's in the nature of the body to do this. All right, don't have to get mad, don't have to until you can't pull it back further. It's like, it's gonna sag. Okay, move on. I can do other things with my life. I am not this body. Yeah, so a very joyful, hopeful perspective, and it helps us to focus our energy on what actually matters. Hooray! So now we'll go on to the next section of this chapter, which is where His Holiness then lays out, something like, I found 16 points here on ways to work with the afflictions. Yeah, but instead of me listing them, I thought we'd discuss them again, because all of us have worked with afflictions, clearly. So let's just take a moment again to reflect on a question, and then we'll do a quick go-around involving everybody. So you better think of something to say. Or not. I mean, I'm sure between us we'll come up with all 16 points. So let's take a moment to settle in. Again, connecting with our breath. So now bring to mind what you might consider your strongest affliction. What has your journey been like working with this affliction? What practices have helped you? And what have not? So let's just pass the microphone around and people just share what antidote has worked well for you, whether or not in relation to a specific affliction, and I'll put them down on the board perhaps. Yeah, I just want to see if we'll get to all of these different points and we'll see what else we don't hit.
Recognizing the disadvantages of the afflictions has really helped, seeing, particularly thinking of anger and attachment, just seeing how unhappy they make myself and they make others, and the stupid things I do under their influence.
So getting clear about the effects of our afflictions. Yeah, for sure. Did they mention that? Not so much, actually, but yeah, for sure. I think in this list, we have the corollary, which Venerable Seppel brought up yesterday, right? When we recognize the disadvantages of an affliction, it also helps us to recognize the benefits of the antidote. Yeah, right. So yeah, spending lots of time thinking about this, meditating on it. I think all of us also remember there was a Vajrasattva retreat where Venerable got everyone in the room to share what they would have been doing on New Year's Day, which immediately made everyone very relieved that they were not out getting drunk, because it was very sobering. Yeah, Stephen was there. I mean, no pun intended. People sharing all the unfortunate things that happen on New Year's, like starting your New Year with your car in an accident and not being able to go to work the next day because you got drunk and crashed the car. It's like, yeah, everyone was like, I'm glad I'm here for New Year's, right? And then thinking about the benefits of doing the opposite. Yeah, for sure. And repeatedly doing that helps.
I think the most helpful practice for me is just simply patience. Mm-hmm. And so when I recognize an affliction arising, creating the temporal space to not respond, so that as it arises, there's a pause in that recognition so that something isn't said, something isn't done, it's not acted upon. And so by not activating it, I then allow myself to consciously choose how to respond.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, patience, but also not patience in the sense of sitting and just waiting, but it sounds like a very active process, right? Recognition. And of course, we know what are the mental factors that help us with this process. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so, as we have more mindfulness and introspective awareness.
For me, it was working on the small bits first. So, like with anger, recognizing that if I still had the mental ability to think when it's happening, for example, to not reflectively get angry when I stub my toe, and not starting with, trying to corral it when I've already become furious, but the small little guys. And so as I dealt with the small ones, then I didn't have like this buildup of frustration and anger that when something big happened that I would just go blah, it's like, so something about just working with the small ones, and also when my mind was not totally involved in the affliction, but having some mental state that was able to do what Jay just said.
Mm-hmm.
But I had to start small.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely in this list. Yep, learn to observe and detect destructive emotions when they are small, right? And then choose how we want to respond. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. For beginners, don't start with the most traumatic incident in your life when you sit and meditate. Right? Start with the stubbing your toe or something your mind can handle. Yeah.
My body's going to tell me when something's not right. So it's usually going to be my heartbeat starts to increase. There's a restlessness in the body, an agitation in the body. So yeah, body sensations are a yellow flag for me that something's starting to happen.
For me, the affliction that is hardest and what I work with a lot is attachment. And so one of the antidotes that I use is when I notice that my mind starts anticipating something, and I get kind of I call it zingy energy. It's like, I'm waiting for it, I'm ready. And then my mind starts going over it again and again, anticipating that. Then if I, at that point, start looking for what I'm exaggerating, then that helps me get some distance and turn that whole record off. And, I may still partake in whatever it is, but it's a different experience. And so the thing that doesn't work is if I shut myself off of anything pleasurable because I'm attached to it, that does not work at all. So it's more about allowing myself to enjoy it and then waving bye-bye to it. It's gone now, and being okay with that.
Anger is definitely the most obvious one. I think when I first came to the Abbey, Venerable Amsel asked me if anger was a problem for me. I was like, no, not a problem. But more and more, you see that I see that my mind is always looking for someone to be frustrated with, or someone to be annoyed by, or these little low-level angers. And then, eventually that kind of boils over and turns into like, oh, well, now I'm actually upset with the way that's happening, or this thing, and it's always looking to blame something for the anger. Something that doesn't help is saying, oh, if I tell everyone exactly what I'm angry about, then I won't be angry anymore. I've done that so many times, and I guess now I finally see it doesn't work. Like, still angry right afterwards, but now maybe I have a little troop, a little companion of people who are also angry, and now it's okay that I'm angry because they're angry too. And validating myself based on other people experiencing anger is not helpful. And then what it does help, the thing that Venerable Sepul brought up this morning for asking, or for developing integrity, which is asking yourself how you want to be, that's something that Venerable Chodron asked us to do, or asked me to do earlier in meeting her. And I've seen so many old people who are quite angry, and I really don't want to be an angry old person. Like, well, none of you. I'm getting looks.
They're angry young people.
One of them. But yeah, really thinking like, the effect of practicing this anger over and over and over again is that when I'm old and I have less control over my narratives and my habits, like, that's how I'm going to be. I don't want to be that way.
The most helpful thing that I've discovered is to really look at the conditions surrounding the arising of an affliction, and recognizing which ones promote that affliction and which ones help to decrease that affliction, and then to change those conditions. Because I know when I create all the causes for an affliction, just by telling myself, not to get attached or not to get angry, it doesn't work. I have to work, you have to look at the surrounding context of when afflictions arise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and before we go on to Jay, that was the first point listed in this little section, that understanding that our afflictions arise from causes and learning how they arise. Right? Like we said, that's the biggest antidote to thinking this is spontaneous, it's natural, or causeless, so forget it. Right? As long as we have those views, then we're going to keep barking up the wrong tree, right? Whereas if we actually look and see, what's coming from my side, what's coming from the world, those other people, and so on, we can figure out how to work with the triggers. Yeah, and then that gives us some,
I'll also add that when I started looking at the conditions, nowhere in those conditions did I find a bad person. And that was really helpful. I could say, yes, this is arising, and I'm not a bad person, because I've looked at all of the conditions, and that's not one of them.
Wow, very powerful.
So another antidote that's worked very well for me is humor, laughter, smiling. So some of my afflictions are so old and so familiar that when they show up, it's like, oh yeah, there you are again, and just sort of smile with it and don't respond to it and recognize it and let it go. And I think my wife Peggy now thinks I'm a little bit odd, because I'll do things like the other night I was washing the dishes, dropped a glass in the sink, and it sort of exploded the way glasses will sometimes when you drop them, and I just spontaneously started laughing. Right? And so rather than things that might have made me angry in the past, now it's like, just laugh at it. That's just samsara. So
I think anxiety or fear is the one that I was like, well, what's the worst one for me? And I'd have to cop to that being it. And what helps is for me to stop myself from doing, because fear comes in and I want to act. I want to do something. I want to fix. I want to do. I want to take control. But this is instead, it's a lot like recognition, but it's more about what I call acceptance, which is what can I accept about this situation that is real and true that I don't want to accept. And then the other one that occurred to me was, and I was telling in the first part, we discussed it between the two of us, but either this is a function of getting older or Buddhism, but I'm not sure which. I now have so many experiences backlogged where I thought something, where I was super angry or super upset or really uptight, or something amazing happened where I've had these big highs or lows, and they seemed so important. And now I've had enough so that I have this backlog. I can look back and be like, I don't think it was. Actually, I know. Wait, it's like, wait a minute. Whoa, we've seen this feeling before. We've seen this situation before, and it wasn't earth-shattering. And I can get through this, especially for fear. It's the wait a minute. It's not going to be. It might not be as bad as you think. And so it's a level of starting to. I think. It's actually a level of starting to trust my karma or myself or something like that. That it's good. That alleviates the anxiety some, and helps to calm everything down.
Yeah. So this idea of, I like what you said about accepting what is real and true, right? Which also ties to what Jay was saying about humor. Yeah. I mean, it's a broken glass in the sink. I mean, that's all it is. Yeah. I'm not an idiot, or it's not someone else's fault. It's a broken glass in the sink. We can move on. Yeah, and when we cut the exaggeration, that just helps everything to calm down. Yeah, and we start to develop more accurate perspectives on a situation. Yep. Yeah, Venerable Kunga. Yeah.
So my biggest problem is attachment, and this one seems to be quite immune to many of the antidotes, so I have to run through many different ones at any given time. But I think the one that really speaks to my heart is thinking about what's my potential, and thinking of the qualities of the Buddha and the Arhats and the Bodhisattvas, how much they help people and how much they're able to let go of concern for themselves. And so I remind myself that I can be like that too, and what a waste if I just settle for the happiness of this life. And what gets in the way of that is precisely just settling for the happiness of this life, thinking it's too hard, or it's going to take too long. Why don't I just be happy right now? So really selling myself short in that way, probably due to laziness or impatience, something like that.
And that's a realistic perspective. Isn't that amazing? Like, it takes us so long to, that the low self-esteem that is the backdrop of this bad play is actually the wrong view. It's realistic to think I can become a Buddha. It's realistic to think I can develop infinite love and compassion. It's like, wow. And when we tap into that, that helps us to stop wasting our time on the short-term, muffin kind of happiness. That level, yeah.
Actually, listening to that, I thought of, this is not different than what Kunga was saying, but it was like the moment in my life when I was really depressed and feeling the victim and said, wait a minute, if I'm going to be a bodhisattva, I can stop being the victim. If I'm the savior, I can't be the victim. That sounds silly, but it was very profound at the moment.
Yeah, reminding ourselves of our spiritual goals.
So the other one I was thinking of before Venerable Kunga sparked that memory for me, was that I was just saying, who is the source of my feelings? Where is the locus of this feeling? Who is the source of this? Whose mind is this feeling in? It's not what I'm observing. It's the meaning that I'm giving to the situation.
Right, and that gets us into one of the biggest antidotes, right, to actually start observing the nature of the affliction itself. Right, in the list, His Holiness talks about the value of cultivating intelligence, right, that we not only cultivate accurate perspectives, but we start to investigate who is this person who's so angry, upset, victimized, and what is anger really? And then we try and find it. And I think when we genuinely try and find it, it becomes a really interesting process. It's like, yeah. Yes, Matt.
First.
Yeah, Venerable Losang.
I had two things actually. One is what Venerable Kunga was saying about not wasting our lives on just our potential on happiness of this life. I think about when we're dealing with just the concerns of this life, we might as well be in the animal realm. And I kind of, because we're mammals, we are animals, I kind of see humans as being a common locus between the animal realm and its own realm. And which one has the most potential and which one do you want to deal with? For anger specifically, I found working with compassion to be the strongest thing. And in general, to just be familiar with and try to cultivate good qualities because they are often the antidotes to the negative qualities. When I started getting serious about studying Buddhism, I made a list and I put some things on one side of the list and some on the other. They were qualities or emotions and attitudes. And the one was things I want to develop and things I want to work on getting rid of. I mean, as simple as patience and impatience, or anger and love, But for anger, seeing the suffering of somebody else, and really that helped me more than most of the other things I could work with, and seeing how my response could make it worse or could make it better.
I think what's a great point that you brought up here is that we can intentionally cultivate these good qualities too. Like just as the afflictions are not spontaneous and random, likewise for the good qualities, right? Love, compassion are not random accidents that happen out of the blue. It's actually something we can practice, and there are all these methods. And if we set our mind to it, we can grow them. So yeah, that's...
Yeah, practice cultivate acts of kindness.
Yeah.
Random acts of kindness.
Okay, so intentional acts. Yes, so Venerable Sepul and Venerable Semke, is it? No.
I'm not sure these have been stated, but when I notice anger arising in my mind, I often ask myself, where does suffering come from? And that really helps to cut things quickly. And when I'm attached to something, I ask myself, what is the cause of happiness? It's not in this thing. And when I can remember to do that, it's helpful.
Right, coming back to that core teaching, right? What's the cause? What's the result?
Listening to the Dharma teachings, and contemplating and meditating helps me.
Right, with the cultivation of intelligence for sure. Hear, think, meditate.
Goes in that direction. On the outside, my strongest is anger, but behind us is attachment or self-grasping. And I like my method, what I'm practicing since long, and is what we had once in class. I don't know who brought it up, if it was Venerable Shuto or somebody else, is a quote by Krishnamurti summarizes it, don't strive for self-perfection, but for the perfection of love for the world. Like applying the practice, for example, of loving kindness matters or compassion, and focus on others in that approach.
Right, and I think, I don't know if anyone's going to mention that, but you're talking about thought transformation as well. Yeah, from being self-centered, you're turning it and saying, I don't want to just bother with myself. I want to expand that to the world.
I had a question as to why anger is the poster child for the afflictions. Because, in listening, you hear 20 angers to every attachment. And if ignorance is the root, I'm just puzzled as to why anger, like I say, is the poster child.
Or standing up for anger is the much maligned. Yeah, what do people think?
I think that we can more easily recognize that anger is a problem, and sometimes we don't recognize the attachment because we mistake that zingy excitement for joy. There was someone here about a week and a half ago who said, "Oh, when I came here, all the monastics were so excited and so welcoming," and I think she was doing the reverse. She was mistaking joy for excitement, and excitement and joy are not the same thing. I like what Venerable Jigme says about the zingy, because it's a little buzz. It's this little buzz, and also I think that anger has attachment as its root. Mm-hmm. We are attached to something we're averse to something because it's how it affects what we're attached to, or if it threatens it.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. I mean, in my own journey, it has been so hard to even come to recognize attachment. There was one retreat where Venerable I can't remember what it was, but I remember her saying, "Oh, do you really want me to talk about attachment? I think all of you are going to leave the room because it's going to challenge." Very often we think it's love, right? For so long, I think that was my biggest aha in the early years here. One day I was like, whoa, I thought I loved and cared for all these people, but it was just about me. Just, the actual recognition of that and having to make peace with that and see how to genuinely care for people is quite hard. I don't know. So I think, anger is the clue. Often, I think it's like, I'm really upset because I'm not getting what I want. Then it's like, what do I want anyway? What's behind that? Yeah, and then there's so many layers that we can get under after that. Yeah. So maybe anger is not the malign poster child. He's the friendly signal. the first boop, boop, boop. We're like, okay, something's up. Gotta dig deep after this. Yeah. Did anything come in from folks online?
Shell shared that the connection between anger, arrogance, and wrong views continues to be very helpful. My anger arises due to the arrogance of thinking that everything should be my way. It was a great aha moment for me, recognizing the even more subtle anger. And then Tracy shared, anger can cause so much regret and is so painful for ourselves and others as well. And someone else affirms that anger causes so much harm to others.
I think we pretty much hit them on them all. So let me just quickly run through that list from this section, and we can see what else we can add. And I'm sure there's more too. Yep. So His Holiness begins with talking about how it's helpful to know the causes of the afflictions and to observe how they arise. Right. Just remembering that they're not spontaneous and they're not givens. Yeah. We don't have to live life with this perpetual state of fear or sadness, but there are ways to change. And then what Tanya mentioned, we can learn to observe and detect them when they're small and quickly apply the antidotes. And many people talked about how we can deliberately cultivate accurate perspectives and make them habitual, right, instead of being habituated to the opposite. He also mentioned how the body is one of our best clues, right? Once we're aware of changes in our breathing and our heart rate and our temperature and our muscle tension, we know something's come up in the mind. And then what Venerable Jigme mentioned, observing the mood or the texture of our mind, right? A zingy feeling or starting to ruminate about one object, like, okay, that's a clue. What we didn't mention, but I think we're already all doing, is to meditate regularly, right? Because that's basically what helps us become more aware of our thoughts and emotions. And that's the whole process of habituating ourselves to constructive emotions is through meditation. We talked a bit about developing intelligence, right, which is the ability to discriminate or analyze the characteristics of an object. Yeah, so many of us talked about just learning to recognize what it is that's coming up in the mind, or recognizing the nature of what we're obsessing about or frustrated with. Yeah. In her teaching, Venerable spent more time on this, really talking about what's called corrupted intelligence, right? When we have wrong views, and how through the 7 cognizers we can transform a wrong view into a correct view. Some of us talk too about being aware of mental processes that lie behind emotions. Yeah, was it? I can't remember who, but yeah. But talking about how, yeah, the interpretation comes from us. Right? I'm interpreting something. I'm telling a story. That's not actually what's happening, right? And then, as Venerable Jumpa pointed out, then we can actually transform our thoughts. Right? I can actually shift the focus onto others instead of running the same old script. What we didn't mention was we can purify and accumulate merit. Right? And I think Venerable often points that out. If we're stuck with a particular affliction, or it seems like we've tried all kinds of antidotes and it's just not going away, then purify. Yeah, do some kind of practice. For me, I do a lot of mantra when my mind's just stuck. And I never really thought about how it works, but I think it helps break the rumination. It's just totally not a logical thing, right? It's a set of sounds that don't have some kind of meaning, but they resonate with positive qualities, apparently. So it just helps me cut the rumination. I just switch and do a lot of mantra, and I find it helps. Yeah, my mind just shifts the object and it calms down. And hopefully there's some merit, yeah, which makes the mind move in the other direction. Yeah. So many of us talked about consciously directing our thoughts in a positive way. Yeah, as Venerable Lo Xiang pointed out, we actively think about the benefits of a good quality or a positive state of mind. We inspire ourselves to work with it, and then we meditate and we repeat. As Tanya pointed out, it's a bit like math almost, or mechanical. Repeat the steps, rinse, repeat, 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 repeat. And all of us here are testament to the fact that it works, right? I mean, if not, we would not still be here. Yeah, we'd be out drinking, I guess, or doing something else, eating donuts. Donuts. Yeah, sorry. No, wait. Come back to class.
She meant Nutella, is what she meant.
No, I meant donuts. Do not send donuts. I did not mean donuts. No. Coming back to number 11, His Holiness pointed out too that we can use gathas to transform our ordinary activities into the path to awakening. So that's a very skillful way where we start small, right? We use a little gatha, as you've seen posted all over the Abbey, on the mirrors, just little tips like, oh, when I'm doing this, think about this. Yeah. As Venerable Jampa has pointed out, I think it was in the teaching she gave too. Yeah, right. So you're going up the hill and you think, may I lead all beings up the hill, up to awakening? Right? May I go into the hell realms to liberate them, and so on. And two, we talked about generating the opposite state of mind to counteract the affliction. Right. So we can go through those lists for ourselves as well. Right. There's a clear opposite state of mind to every affliction. And we didn't bring up this one, use your imagination. So in the book, it was mentioning how you can imagine the world is filled with bones as a way to, reduce our attachment to samsara. Or I think Venerable is very creative at this one. I really like the one about being queen for a day. Right? Imagine yourself getting every single thing you actually want. Right? And go for it. Right? You're queen of the day, you get the car, you get the house, or whatever it is. And then what? Right? But just go there, yeah? Or you actually get every single thing you want. And then what? Yeah, or just visualizing offering everything to the 3 jewels, right, that we enjoy. That's our imagination put to very good use. And he talks about too how we eventually learn to be a doctor to our own minds. So we learn, what works when. Like Venerable Jigme said, when she's attached, it does not work to be like, you must separate from the object. You are going to deny yourself. If you know that doesn't work, don't do it. Yeah, exactly. So the example he brought up in the text was how, when you're arrogant or there's a lot of excitement in the mind, then you do meditations to reduce that, right? Whether it's on impermanence or the foulness of samsara and so on. But if your mind is depressed, that is not the time to be doing those meditations. It's just going to make you feel worse, right? So it's really tricky, right, to learn to recognize that. But over time, we learn how to work with these different states, especially in retreat, I think. So your mind gets depressed and you think about, precious human rebirth, all the good qualities that you aspire for, your own potential, right? That's the time to switch, But of course, then you don't do that when you're arrogant, right? Like, I'm so awesome, and so on. So just learning how to bring ourselves to that middle. So over time, we get skilled with a two-pronged approach, right? We manage the unwholesome emotions, and we learn to be familiar with the wholesome emotions. And and as Venerable Seppo, we come back, right, to once we think about the benefits of the wholesome emotions, that just inspires us to move in that direction. I was trying to find this quote, and I think it's from one of Jeffrey Hopkins' books about how, when most Buddhist practice just starts with thinking about the benefits of something or the disadvantages of something, and how if we sit and think deeply about the benefits of a wholesome state of mind, everything just naturally moves in that direction. You don't have to beat yourself up or like push, right? It's like, oh yeah, I do want to cultivate that. And things just fall into place. So just spending a lot of time actually on the benefits of something you want to cultivate is a very good use of time. And it's better than beating yourself up, I can tell you that. Don't go there. Okay, so before we close, anything to add?
And someone asked, what is the antidote for restlessness?
Yeah, so Venerable Tarpa pointed, breathing meditation helps, especially if you're thinking about the restlessness in the context of the 5 hindrances, to concentration. That's where we talk about restlessness and regret. So, all these methods help. Investigate the cause of the restlessness. Is it attachment? Like, I can't stand to sit here anymore, I gotta get up and eat a donut. or is it more, sorry, I'm not hungry, I don't actually eat donuts. Or is it more, wow, I really don't want to think about this horrible thing I did. I feel so poorly about myself. I need to get out of this seat. So then right? I need to do some purification. So sit and investigate. What's behind the restlessness? Who's restless anyway? How is it coming up? And where does it come from? And then I think once you have a clearer sense of that, you'll know which of the antidotes to apply.
I think also with most of these, if we're stuck on one thing, if we consciously open up our perspective, so if I feel restless, then what would contentment feel like? And how could I get a big mind that would have some contentment? Mm-hmm. So again, just opening the view, I think.
Yeah, I loved how in the definition it said, affliction is a state of mind that's narrow. Right? So naturally, once we go to big view, it's got to disperse. Yeah, Venerable Tarpa.
I think another way that opens up the view is something I read in a book, but I thought was very helpful. They were saying that Westerners sometimes are slower to progress, and one of the reasons is we get kind of caught up in the dramas rather than stepping back and seeing what the processes of the mind. And that's where we can work with things better, to see. So what we already do in that way, I think, is we have trained ourselves pretty well here to see what are our habitual patterns. And that habitual patterns are processes of the mind. And once you can step away from the content and just see, like, this is, for me, works really well with doubt. I used to just be caught in it, and I didn't know what it was. But I realized that what my mind was doing was the same no matter what the content was. The mind was the actual same. And once I recognized that, I realized, well, the problem isn't, I'm not going to fix this by looking at the content. I'm going to fix this by recognizing this is what doubt is like in the mind. And I already had learned the hard way that it never got me anywhere. So now when I say it's doubt, I can actually drop it because I know it's a dead end. But you have to know it's a dead end before you can drop things.
And like you said, it's coming to it through meditation too, right? Knowing, okay, there's a mind and it has processes. And what are they? Yeah. So we are way over time, I'm sorry, but I'd like to read you a 2-page thing from Venerable's website that I always find very helpful, and I hope it will keep everyone going in this very long process of working with afflictions. And it comes from a talk called A Monastic's Mind. So I'm guessing most lay people will not read this transcript, so that's why it's worth reading as well. But anyway, if you Google A Monastic's Mind on her website, you'll find it. So she has this section here called Self-Acceptance and Compassion for Ourselves. And she says, in the process of working with our mind, it's important to give ourselves some space and not expect ourselves to be perfect, especially if we're a monastic. After we ordain, or really any Buddhist practitioner, once you start on the path, it's easy to think, I should act like Rinpoche, your teacher. And she says, especially if you have a teacher like Lama Zopa Rinpoche who doesn't sleep. You might compare yourselves to him and think there's something wrong with you because you have to sleep. And you think, I should stop sleeping and practice all night. If only I had more compassion, I could do this. We become judgmental with ourselves. Look how selfish I am. What a disaster I am. I can't practice. Everyone else practices so well. I am such a mess. We become very self-critical and down on ourselves. Being like this is a total waste of time. It's completely unrealistic and has no benefit at all. Nothing positive comes from beating up on ourselves. Absolutely none. So Venerable says, I spent a long time being very judgmental of myself, thinking that this was good and right. I can tell you from my experience that nothing useful comes from it. So what is a realistic attitude? We have to notice our defects. We notice our weak areas and faults and have some acceptance of ourselves. Accepting ourselves doesn't mean we're not going to try to change. We recognize a certain trait as disadvantageous, a negative quality that we have to work on. But at the same time, we have some gentleness and compassion for ourselves. Yes, I have this negative trait. Here it is. It's not going to disappear completely in the next 10 minutes or even in the next year. I'm going to have to work with this for a while. I accept this and I know that I can and will do it. Thus, we have some basic self-acceptance instead of expecting ourselves to be some kind of perfect human being. And when we have that basic self-acceptance, we can start applying the antidotes to our faults and change our lives. We have the self-confidence that says, we can do this. When we lack that self-acceptance and instead beat up on ourselves, saying, I'm not good because I can't do this, that person is better than me, I'm such a wreck, we then push ourselves thinking, I've got to be perfect, and get tight inside. This is not a useful strategy for self-transformation. Self-acceptance, on the other hand, has a quality I call transparency. We're not afraid of our faults. We can talk about our weak points without feeling ashamed or mortified. Our mind is compassionate with ourselves. I have this fault. The people around me know I have it. It's not a big secret. This transparency enables us to be more open about our faults. We can talk about them without concealing them and without feeling humiliated when we do so. Trying to cover up our faults is useless. When we live with others, we know each other's faults very well. We all have 84,000 disturbing attitudes and negative emotions. Others know it, so we might as well admit it. It's no big deal. We don't have to pretend that we only have 83,999. In admitting our faults to ourselves and others, we also realize that we're all in the same boat. We can't feel sorry for ourselves because we are more deluded than anyone else. We don't have a greater or lesser number of disturbing attitudes and negative emotions than other sentient beings. So she concludes saying it's very important that we talk and be open with each other. And I think that's exactly what we've done here. As Dharma friends, we share and we support each other. And we share the advice that we've learned. And that's how we keep going on this path, by being very kind to ourselves for a start, recognizing what we are, where we are, and connecting with each other and helping each other to grow. So thank you all for participating and sharing. And so let's take a moment just to rejoice and dedicate the merit. Let's just rejoice that we were able to share with such kindness and humility and transparency with each other, knowing that all of us go through the same difficulties and problems. And the important thing is practicing the antidotes and encouraging each other to keep going. So we can imagine all the positive energy we've created as brilliant light at our hearts that we send out into the entire universe. Especially to beings that have completely different view of afflictions, who might think that they are inherent in the mind, who might have no tools to work with them. May they someday come into connection with the Dharma so they can be freed of wrong views and progress on the path to full awakening.